Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Reina's podcast about the coronavirus in the United States. So, first, just to get everyone caught up, I want to give a summary of what the response has been. I know if you're listening to this podcast, you probably want a nice comprehensive overview. So, I'm going to lay it out briefly and then we'll get into the nitty-gritties. So first in the US, there was denial by the government. Then, a few superficial gestures followed by panic and taking it seriously, but ultimately leaving the response to the local governments without any comprehensive national agenda. So now let's get into a more of a comprehensive overview of how the government responded, or honestly, I'm going to argue in this podcast, didn't really as nearly as much as they should, but we'll get into that later. Don't want to get ahead of myself. So back in February, the alarm bells were starting to be raised about COVID-19, and Donald their administration response was really just to downplay the severity of the virus and the threat that it posed to the United States of America. The Center for Disease Control wouldn't accept the tests that were developed overseas and instead tried to develop their own tests, which obviously took much longer, especially since that wasn't exactly a priority. In March, it started to become much more clear that there were more than a few cases in the U.S., and Donald Trump decided to take it seriously then and convened a news conference, and he banned all travel from Europe. Previous to that, he did ban travel from China, but of course, at the point when he banned travel from Europe, the coronavirus was already in the United States, and there was no comprehensive testing strategy, which essentially made understanding how many people were truly infected impossible and rendered the travel ban pretty much useless. By the time people were finally socially distancing and there were real stay-at-home orders, it was growing. The coronavirus was really just growing in hot zones, and especially in the Pacific Northwest and New York City. And the federal government left the response ultimately into the hands of each state. And for a really long time, and to an extent still now, the states were each just competing with each other for, how many ventilators they had and for PPE, until things took off to the point where the number of cases and deaths surpassed anywhere else in the world. Now, I think the next important piece of this is to really dissect that and look at it from the bigger picture about what the response has demonstrated about the government and the political culture in the U.S. And I think the biggest obvious reasoning behind a lot of the Trump administration's actions has been that there is an election coming up. Donald Trump is extremely worried about the election coming up in November. He's been worried about the election coming up in November ever since February, when he was neglecting warning signs about the coronavirus. Trump is getting a lot of pressure from the right-wing side of the political spectrum in the United States to reopen the economy. Obviously, shutting down businesses or non-essential businesses has taken a huge hit on the U.S. economy, and things are not really looking great, which, when thinking about elections, is usually a key determiner in whether a president gets elected, and Trump especially at least entered when the economy was on the up and had claimed that he really did a lot to help the economy. So the economy tanking does not bode well for his reelection. And this has also sparked a lot of right-wing conspiracy theories that the government is making it worse than it is. And in general, it's just sort of, it's turned a medical pandemic into a polarized political war, which I think says a lot about the U.S. political culture and particularly the priorities of the administration right now. Now, I think an obvious impact and something that a lot of people have been critiquing Trump about and has sparked a lot of anger towards the Trump administration, at least more than there was even previously, is, the coronavirus has had a lot of terrible effects. The unemployment rate is skyrocketing. People's lives are completely halted or uprooted and overturned. And it's, the mental health in the country and attitude is not great in general. But I think what's also driving a lot of Americans' anger and a lot of people's, just reason to be upset is that there were so many obvious signs to Trump about what was happening, even in February. And as I gave you that, comprehensive overview of the government's response, this could have been avoided. And I think that's one of the hardest things for people to grapple with. And as I was saying, is one of the things that just has caused so much anger towards the Trump administration, is that things didn't have to be like this. There was a very clear way to stop this. Viruses spread exponentially. And if the social distancing that we're doing now, while it is working and while it's the right thing to be doing in this moment, if we had started that social distancing 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month earlier in February, when the alarm bells were starting for Trump, even not at the scale that they are now, but even if he had taken some type of precautions and just started things sooner, things would not be nearly as bad as they were now. And, I saw this one article that showed a graph, just projecting the overview of the coronavirus now and, showing the spread that it's taken, and one other graph showing what would have happened if Trump had taken even a quarter of the social distancing policies that were in place now, and just how much, if he had taken those policies 2 to 3 weeks before when he was actually getting those warnings. And it's just, things would have been so much better. And that, wanting to win the election and not upset the economy just completely replaced everything else. And I think that's been one of the hardest things for Americans, especially not just with dealing with, what's happening, but just dealing with the fact that it didn't have to be this way. And one of the obvious effects that this response has impacted the country already and moving forward is the economy has completely tanked, and it's going to take a really long time for it to recover from what's going on. And I think what's really interesting is while the right wings are blaming, Dr. Fauci and those who want to keep the economy closed now, it's very ironic to me considering if Trump had taken these actions earlier, the economy would never have gotten to the place that it was today. The whole pandemic wouldn't have gotten there, and things probably would have cleared up sooner, and the economy would have had more time to gain back. And I think this is going to change political culture in many ways also in the United States. Especially with the election coming up, it's definitely going to be, as it's already become such a political polarized issue, which is just honestly hilarious when you think about it. But the election is coming up, and that the left Democratic side is going to say that we need to keep more things closed and provide more relief, and the right side is going to want to start opening things back up. And Trump especially, and he's already been doing this, is just really going to start shifting the blame even more in typical Trump fashion. It at least is my prediction. He's already, there are many instances of him tweeting and calling the virus the Chinese virus instead of the coronavirus, and people have been blaming Dr. Fauci. And I think that that's just, we're going to see that polarization become even worse, especially as hopefully eventually the shift becomes not just how do we deal with the virus, but how do we really focus all of our energy into helping the economy get back up. So I think that's just going to be really interesting to see and watch it play out. And hopefully just, my hope is that the American public will continue to social distance and continue to take precautions, and that people will learn from this and trust science, which is something that I think Donald Trump needed a lesson in to begin with. And I hope that this will just help the entire country do that as well.